All right, Chaz, let's get right to it. One of the longest road trips of the season for the Reds. You have the bonkers game in Baltimore. You sweep the team that you should sweep in the Colorado Rockies, and you get home with a 6-3 trip. So let's revisit briefly that identity question that we brought up about this team before. Do we know any more about this version of the Cincinnati Reds at this point in the season after the road trip that just concluded at Coors Field?
I think the most important game of the road trip, even more than the 24-run game in Baltimore, was Friday in Colorado. Because, the Miami series, not that it can't happen, but it really shouldn't happen. Dropping two very winnable games, kind of in your own control in a lot of those ways. Friday was a back and forth game. It was grimy with the weather, a very Coors Field special type game, and they gritted it out. Now, do we know a lot more about this Reds team? I feel better about the lineup, but as a whole, it's the kind of stuff that you want to see against stronger quality competition. But overall, it's a team that's kind of steadied the course, righted the ship, and is in a workable spot heading in to the meat of the season.
Yeah, and let's remember this about those two games the first two games at Coors Field. Each of those two games against the Rockies started the ninth inning a one-run game. And so the Reds, yeah, you battle the weather, the ballpark, and those things, but they came away with wins in each of those two games, which they should. Finished off the sweep on Sunday. They start this week 2 games over 500, which sounds good. Second in the division, a game and a half behind the Cubs. And you kick things off at Great American Ballpark this week with 4 for the first time seeing division rival St. Louis. I think that's going to tell us a little bit more about this team as well, taking on the Cardinals for the first time this season. Welcome to Power Stacks with Giesenslaw and Goldsmith, proud members of the Growler Podcast Network. Chaz, while the rest of the sports world and to some degree, part of your time was consumed by the NFL draft. It was a pretty good week for the Reds, but I would regret not asking you to give me a 15 to 20 second recap of your feeling on the Bengals draft weekend. What would that be?
Well, first of all, there's nothing like following and covering and watching the draft while listening to Reds on radio on your headphones in the media room, and that is a fun way to spend a weekend. Bengals draft, it was a total reset of the defense and not quite a fix all the holes like we expected because they've got more work to do.
I like that. It was fun, though. It was fun.
I don't have a cross-sport comparison. I apologize. I should have come prepared with that.
Listen, you emptied the bag on that last week, so that was all good. But an excellent, great sports weekend. I think we all appreciate just the events on the sports calendar, regardless of the sport, the big events, the draft, the Stanley Cup playoffs, baseball, all of those things right now. It's a good time to be talking and doing what we do. But back to the Reds in the leadoff spot this week. I've got this. I made this note over the weekend. Ailio Cruz will start this week in these games against St. Louis with an 11-game hitting streak and I think a career-high 15-game on-base streak. And at this point, doing those things, I almost feel like he blends in a little bit with the lineup right now. It doesn't stand out the way that he may have in the past. Is that fair, or can you see that?
So he had that slump early not to call it a slump. He had that quieter stretch earlier at one point this season. And kind of the message was, one, got to be more aggressive early in counts. And two, this is a completely different thing. You've got to be less passive late in counts. There were a lot of called strike threes against Ailio Cruz. And I think you're seeing, even though it hasn't exploded production-wise in a very loud way, you're seeing him right the ship significantly in those two areas. You're seeing him having a much better feel, much more comfort and confidence finding his pitch early in at-bats. And then the two-strike approach has been the most notable thing to me. Taking what the pitcher gives you, taking the part of the field the team is giving you, very smooth, very in control, very steady. Those are good things to see from Ailio Cruz, because I have no doubt that at some point he's going to be doing the loud things as well. And this is some of the smartest base running we've been seeing from him as well.
Smart base running, and you alluded to the rest of the lineup, which we'll get to in just a minute, but two things stood out to me about Ailio Cruz in Colorado. In the ninth inning on Saturday,
yeah,
which, as we said, was a one-run game at the time. When those insurance runs the Reds picked up became the difference in the game, De La Cruz had an 11-pitch AB that he eventually worked into an RBI single. That at bat stood out. And then you said this too, just about the way he's manipulating a pitch or an at bat or an opportunity. Earlier in that same game, he had just a little chip swing where he placed the ball into shallow left center field, essentially just guided the ball with a half swing to some open grass on the field. And that's the second or third time I think that I've seen him do that this season. It's different, or it stood out to me because it's not the all-out swing, especially from the left side, that we typically see with him. It seems to be an indication of a growth or a maturity in some small way that he can see an opportunity like that and then execute that way into a positive AB.
That's actually what this whole offseason, spring training, et cetera, was about with De La Cruz, having him play better situational baseball. And that's a great way to put it, a great example to show that, like, Ellie is playing the game as opposed to looking for opportunities to show his traits in the loudest way, which maybe he did at different points earlier in his career. The
Mhm.
message to the coaching staff from him: play the game, do the right things, be safe, be smart. And I'm trying to think, like, yeah, all right, couple of the throws got to be better. But kind of take that part out when you look at specifically on the offensive and base running side, the way he's playing the game, definitely an older feeling De La Cruz in those areas.
The Reds start this week tied, or the Reds start this week in the top three, I should say, in baseball in runs per game. And that's even with, if you go back and look, they've had 6 games that they scored 2 or fewer runs. And so you've kind of skewed it both ways. That, that brings your average down, but then a 24-run game and a 14-run game certainly swing things the other way. But as it stands, runs per game, top 3 in baseball at this point, and I do think it speaks to a little bit more of the depth and the quality of the lineup that's come into play the last couple of weeks. And the takeaway from the Colorado series postgame from Terry Francona after the Austin Hayes 2-home run game, he said, "We're a different team since Hayes has been back." What about Austin Hayes? It's only 12 games. You've talked about it's a prove-it deal for him in Cincinnati, but there's no one feeling themselves more and more confident right now than Austin Hayes.
Well, first I'll talk about how in the Baltimore series, you had the Orioles game planning around Hayes as opposed to game planning around Ellie De La Cruz. And we didn't see that last year with anyone in the Reds lineup. You have that. I talked about how Ellie plays the game. I don't think anyone, aside from Matt McLean, when he's like truly, truly rolling, which he isn't right now, I don't know that anyone on the Reds plays the game better than Austin Hayes. Situationally smart, knowing when to really let it rip with the swing, specifically in counts, the way he manages that. And from a pitch selection standpoint, knowing when to get off his A+ swing. Like, there are all of these little things that he does incredibly well that are exactly what the Reds are trying to be. And I've said this before here too, but I'm going to say it again. Terry Francona hasn't praised a player more than he's praised Austin Hayes. And the quote from Colorado is another example about how above and beyond Francona is going to make it clear how he feels about the Reds' new outfield.
Austin Hayes has played every game since he was activated. He started all but one of those games. He's been on base in all but one game, on base multiple times in half of the games. Doesn't walk much. He's there to swing the bat. He wants to do damage. On one of the pregame shows over the weekend, talking with Sam compared watching Austin Hayes swing and the violence and the intent of his swing to Tiger Woods in his prime. When Tiger Woods stood in the tee box in his prime and just, let it rip and, contorted his body, and you want to do damage. That's Austin Hayes right now trying to swing. He's been one of the most productive hitters in baseball since he's been back, and if he can stay healthy, again, there are leadership qualities there. There are lots of things that can positively impact this lineup in lots of ways, but right now watching him play baseball is a lot of fun.
I've got a stat. Austin Hayes got traded from Baltimore to Philly at the deadline last year. He was there for all of August and September. Now there was the kidney infection. He was in and out, but Austin Hayes had 20 hits in a Phillies uniform. Austin Hayes, who has missed half the season this year with the calf injury, has played 2 weeks. Austin Hayes has 19 hits in a Reds uniform. So that's got to feel pretty good.
In 85 games last season between those two teams, Baltimore and Philly, he had 5 home runs. In 12 games with the Reds, he's got 5 home runs. So clearly, Austin Hayes, his mission this year, both individually and team-wise, is off to a fantastic start. But as we've talked,
Let me say this too.
Yeah.
He's just a good player. It's as simple as that. Just a good baseball player.
He's a ball player. But as we talk so much, and rightfully so, about Hayes, I think a couple of weeks ago, it would have sounded crazy to draw this comparison, to begin this sentence right now with looking at, through 12 games, Austin Hayes and Noelvi Marte. They've played the same number of games, 12 on the season, roughly the same number of at-bats, 49 for Hayes, 44 for Marte. Hayes has 19 hits. Marte has 16 hits. Marte has 4 doubles. Hayes has 3. Obviously, Hayes has a little bit of an advantage in home runs, 5-3. Marte, with the grand slam in Baltimore, there's an asterisk there, but he's got 15 driven in. Hayes has 13. Neither guy's going to walk. Marte has struck out half the number of times that Hayes has, and also has 4 steals. So it's not apples to apples, but for a player coming from and trying to pick themselves up off the deck the way Marte was last season, for him to early in this second opportunity this year put up those kinds of numbers, what do you see right now in the growing confidence, not only of Noelvi Marte in himself and in his game, but in Terry Francona's confidence in Marte to keep putting him out there?
I keep going back to the story of his year. Spring training, he was not a candidate to make the roster. Comes up that one, that week from hell that we talked about where, you had all the injuries, you needed somebody, and you call up Noelvi Marte just because you wanted someone on the 40-man roster who you knew you'd be sending down in about 5 days. And they called him up, and I think they played him twice, and they were going to play him once, except he had a really good game on one of those games. So they kept him in the lineup the next day. And then they sent him down, and frankly, I didn't expect to see him for a bit. Then Christian Encarnacion Strand gets hurt, and because of the versatility on the roster, because Lux and Espinal are both infielders / outfielders, they're actually short on outfielders right now anyway. Like, they could have just called back up Hurtubise to refill the spot that Strand's injury vacated. Obviously, Hurtubise was in for Hayes to start the season. You could have just stuck with the guys who had made this team out of camp, with Hurtubise kind of as your 27th man, but they were impressed, they told me, with how Marte worked. And also how he looked in that first start, one of 2 starts he had in that first stint. And then to come up and hit like this, it's the surprise of the season. It's something that I don't think anyone was expecting. There's a confidence, there's a smile, there's a composure from an X's and O's standpoint. Marte last year would slip off his back foot as he turned, and that made him susceptible to the low and away breaking ball. This year, what he's doing is he's staying through the ball, and you're seeing all the opposite field stuff. That's been so much the focus drilled in. Opposite field, stay through the ball, and he's doing that to a T. Now, I need to see him clean it up defensively, and there was a base running moment, I think, in Miami as well. I think that's going to be really important. But there was also that double play over the weekend, that 5 unassisted 3 double play.
Mm-hmm.
No one else on the team makes that play. So you're seeing a lot of that upside translate, and that's been really encouraging.
Terry Francona mentioned, and I think you mentioned as well, certainly, that once Spencer Steer was cleared to move from just the designated hitter only, to get back in the game, to play the field, to be, all in for the game, that might benefit him at the plate as well as he tries to get things back together from the shoulder injury. Does it feel like that's happening now?
Especially Sunday. Like, yes. Well, also he homered, I think, on Friday. But then Sunday as well. Like, he just looks like Spencer Steer. And, we talk about Hayes being a ball player. That's like the Spencer Steer thing. You know what I mean? And you're seeing Spencer Steer kind of fill that spot as well. Specifically more recently with obviously less production than Hayes, but it's funny. Like, everything we said about Hayes, that's exactly the stuff that Steer was planned. Like, the team planned for him to do that on this team. And him doing it now, obviously, 2's better than 1. Spencer Steer looks a lot more like Spencer Steer. the way he's getting his swing off, the confidence in his shoulder, the way he's bouncing around. Like I think maybe my biggest takeaway from the weekend was a lot more encouragement around Spencer Steer.
Terry Francona's patience has been a topic of conversation, and he has been patient with, I think, everyone. What do you see right now in his patience, his plan for two of the guys in the lineup who have struggled, continue to struggle, and Matt McLain and Jamer Candelario?
Well, McLean's not going anywhere. McLean could have another month like this, and where he's for 60, but because of the value he has defensively, because of the intimidation factor that there really is, because of who he is and what he's capable of at the plate. I'll say it again: McLean's not going anywhere more than anything, and I want to talk more to Matt about this, but this is my feel. McLean missed a whole year of baseball, and a stretch like this was inevitable for a guy who missed that much time. Now, Jamer Candelario, frankly, we talked about at the end of last season, there was a way to spin positively, and you heard some of this internally. Spin positively Candelario's 2024 season. You could say, man, he was lost in April, and everyone Jamer acknowledges he was lost in April last year. But from May to the end of the season, he was solid. He was on pace for 29 homers, is the stat you hear a lot. And then you hear like, well, if he just doesn't have that April and he's just that player over the course of the season, there won't be an adjustment to a new team this year. Well, it turns out Candelario's April in 2025 is worse than the April he had in 2024. So what you've seen recently is Francona act on some of these, starts we're seeing, playing Marte more over Candelario, even though Candelario started spring training heads and shoulders above Marte on the organizational depth chart. I also think defense is a real factor to play in that as well. I should look this up, but Jamer, he played like 3 of the last 7 games. I need to look up how much third base he's been playing because that seems like it's also significantly taking a dip with Gavin Lux and Espinal getting more time there over Jamer. So if Jamer was a first baseman / DH, well, Steer's your first baseman right now, and DH sure, but there are outfielders and other guys they're getting into the mix. Your Jake Fraley's, Gavin Lux's, etc. So and there are only so many spots. We talked a couple days ago about like kind of the details of what's going on with Candelario, and now you're seeing Francona act on it last week from a lineup perspective.
For the most part, the Reds pitched well on this trip, and the way that things ended, I mean, as you look back over the trip, we could spend some time on Ailio Pagan, who's clearly settled 7 saves now and has clearly settled in and kind of embraced that role, you think?
Let me say something about Pagan. Like, so I
Yeah.
wasn't on this trip in Colorado. I'll give you a tool or a thing as a beat writer covering the team that I do. Whenever anyone gets 3 saves in 3 days, I write a story on you because like that is such a hard thing to do. It's just like if you pitch like 7 shutout innings, right? You get a story like so. I wasn't in. I'll write about Pagan here coming up shortly, but that is an automatic for me. You get a story, and unfortunately, I wasn't there in Colorado to deliver that story. But the reason I like always make sure to do that is because of how truly difficult it is, and how much that shows about someone
Mhm.
who's capable of something like that.
Yeah, that was part of the story. The weekend, one of the takeaways was also, I think, statement games is probably too strong, but, get right games for Hunter Green and Nick Lodolo. I don't think any of us had any question after Green's short start, and kinda how that went for him, his motivation in coming back for his next start, pitching in that ballpark. He had a quote unquote "quality start," which I think a quality start at Coors Field takes on a little bit, um, better feel than maybe at a regular ballpark. But he was dominant, he attacked, he got back to who he was, and then Nick Lodolo on Sunday, maybe his most dominant start of the season. He had, the first one that he had that was 6 shutout innings, first time out. He only had 1 strikeout in that game. He had 9 strikeouts against the Rockies. They couldn't make contact, and he was in control to the tune of flirting with a no-hitter. 2 infield hits that could have gone either way were the only 2 hits he allowed across the 7 innings that he threw. That to me from Nick Lodolo, not that you needed something to remind you, but he looked more like the dominant Lodolo that we've seen at times, and that certainly moving forward is one of the top 2 pieces in this rotation.
There are 2 big differences with Adola. One we've talked extensively about on this show, the health, the ability to have a full off season, also the
Mhm.
changeup. I didn't even mention is a
Yeah.
big difference there. Like the biggest difference with Lolo is body language. And now I know he was facing a bad Rockies lineup, but all season, even in the starts where he hasn't been his best, when adversity hits, he's still out there like, all right, I'm on the attack. Like, not like, let's go, because that's kind of a cliche thing to say, but like, Lodolo has so much more of that fire, I'm going to throw it by you mentality than I've ever seen from him. And now I've asked him about that. He said that's just a factor of the confidence, which is a response to the health. That all does tie back to the health with Lodolo. But there is a gear I think we're seeing just in how Lodolo carries himself. That's more mature, more confident, more aggressive. And again, the Rockies are bad, but all season you've seen that from Lodolo, and that's been really cool to see kind of that growth and evolution.
Movie question for you.
Okay.
Have you seen Shawshank Redemption?
I'm familiar with the concept. I've not seen Shawshank. I'm familiar with the concept.
Are your movie questions are I've seen it, I've heard about it, or I haven't seen it, not I'm familiar with the concept. That's not the right answer.
It's like the greatest movie of all time. I'm aware they get out of the prison.
Well, it's up there. We'll put it that way. It's up there. But I bring that up because Sam and I have talked about this on pre and post game before. There's a scene in Shawshank Redemption when one of the main characters, Andy Dufresne, who's tall and lean and lanky, is walking the prison yard, and Morgan Freeman's character comments on the way in which he strolls across the prison yard like he doesn't have a care in the world, like he's not in prison, and it just doesn't fit. It stands out. When you watch Nick Lodolo pregame walk out to the outfield for his warm-up, or walk to the mound, or he's just punched somebody out with the back foot slider and he's walking off the mound, he's got that carefree Andy Dufresne walking across the prison yard kind of stroll to him. That's who he is. That's very appealing to me to watch that. But I, along with our producer, Kent Garrison, are a little bit horrified that you haven't seen The Shawshank Redemption.
I'm debating whether or not I should say this. I'm going to. I've seen the Phineas and Ferb parody, not parody, but like homage to Shawshank Redemption. Phineas and Ferb was a cartoon from my generation. They did a whole episode which was an homage to Shawshank Redemption, and I've seen that. I know. I debated whether or not to compare that.
Bring in Phineas and Ferb, which I don't even know what that is, to
great show.
All right. Also, they filmed a lot of the prison stuff in Ohio. You know that, right? And you are from
Ohio. I know. I am from Ohio.
All right, you're from Ohio. Okay, topic for another day.
I just ruined your day.
You kind of just torpedoed my whole morning with that, but that's okay. I didn't expect you to say yes, and that's no disrespect. I just didn't expect you to say yes, so it's okay. We'll catch you up on some of those things later. Quick injury updates. These are good. If you watched highlights over the weekend from Louisville, Tyler Stevenson looks good. He's throwing runners out. He had the massive home run on Sunday. But as we said before, because of Jose Trevino and Austin Wynns, you can afford to be patient, to give him an extra game or a couple of extra ABs.
I also think that a part of it, too, is kind of the McLean lesson from 2023 when McLean had a minor oblique issue. He pushed it because it was the end of the season and because he's Matt McLean and all that kind of stuff. And then, as they say, he ended up grade 2ing it, grade 2. And he missed the rest of the season. So deliberate with Stevenson. Stevenson said, I think the quote was, he wanted to start his rehab assignment on opening day, like, for the very start of the season. And there was a deliberate plan throughout all of this and a patience there. Certainly good news with Tyler Stevenson.
Certainly looks good now. Transition right now to something that the baseball world, we got news over the weekend of the passing of former Reds executive and baseball executive in general, Walt Jocky, who passed away at the age of 74. There was a moment of silence in Denver because in the early to mid 90s, as that expansion team was just getting started, Jocky was part of that group. Certainly, he came to be known for taking over the Cardinals not long after that in the mid-90s, built that franchise up, won a World Series in St. Louis, and then came to the Reds in 2008, where he put together playoff teams there in 2010, 2012, 2013, was the Sporting News Executive of the Year 3 different times in his career, and up to his passing over the weekend was still a special advisor for the Reds in the front office. What do you make of what was your experience with Walt Jocky? We certainly all had those over the years. And what do you make of his impact, not only just on the game, but on the Cincinnati franchise in particular?
Well, I'll start here. When he came, and took over the Reds front office, there was a credibility and kind of an aggressiveness that came with it too, that defined that era with a clear vision for,
Credibility.
yeah, with a clear vision for maximizing what that window was going to be. And it was kind of a Terry Francona move of its time when the Reds, hired originally Walt Jocketty and then eventually promoted him to be their lead decision maker. Also, like, hearing guys talk about him with the respect and appreciation and admiration for the vision that he had. And then I got to know Walt too. First, just a really kind guy who knew me before I even, you know what I mean? Like hey Charlie, how you doing? And he wanted to talk to me before I even, went over to introduce myself to him. I remember, we had a lot of conversations over the years. One of them in spring training of 2023, we had a very long conversation about team building, about the Reds and their philosophy, and about, he went so far out of his way to talk about the similarities he saw between the Reds young core that at the time, Ellie and McLean and Abbott and a few more hadn't even debuted. The similarities he saw between that and, the Votto Bruce Phillips group that led the Reds on those playoff runs. Like, he truly believed in this group, and that was clear every time we spoke. And kind of one more Walt story to kind of show the respect that he had in the organization. And I'll make this public. After the Reds hired Francona, I was talking, just kind of a background conversation with Nick Kroll, just about how big of a win this was for the Reds. And I said, it's been cool kind of getting congratulations from around the league around that. And I talked to Nick about that. And he said, man, I just spoke to Walt, and that was a really cool conversation. And it was that conversation with Walt specifically that carried a lot of weight with, or not, I mean, they all carried weight, but that carried a little extra meaning with Nick as he reflected on all the people he was hearing from. So that goes again to show just the respect, the admiration that Walt carried, the legacy that he has within this organization. And one last thing to circle back to, just a really kind guy who I really enjoyed getting to know.
Kindness, credibility, respect. Those are the words that came up over the weekend when you discussed Walt Jocketty's passing. But the things that he did, again, the credibility came when he showed up in Cincinnati, very quickly made additions and tweaks to those teams that set them on a path to those playoff teams that, you can still look back at some of those, and those are some of the best Reds teams of, this generation. But adding Scott Roland from St. Louis.
Let me talk about that. Like, the Scott Roland trade is an archetype that the Reds, to be honest, but also a lot of teams have tried to execute over the last fit. And like, when people talk about that style of trade, it's making the Scott Roland trade, and most of them don't work. Most of the next Scott Rolands aren't Scott Roland, and so like that might be one of that might be Walt's defining move in terms of too, like, the amount of times it's tried to be replicated around the league, but it's not easy, and that goes to show how impressive of a deal that was, the Scott Roland trade.
It was. Shifting gears now, there was a moment over the weekend on Sunday for baseball fans, on Saturday, I guess, that brought to mind a great Red, a great player, a great person, and all I could think of and all I can hear in my head is this from a few years back in the Reds dugout during a game. Classic Eugenio Suarez. There it is. One more time. Gino, as he became known in Cincinnati, had a 4-homer game for the Diamondbacks. Congrats to Gino for joining that select club. Not many guys in that group that have had the 4-homer game, but I went back and I watched each of the home runs and the calls. There was a full house in Arizona for that, and it just kind of gives you chills. But watching the joy that Eugenio Suarez played the game with, watching him have a moment like that, it was unbelievable. So we have to give our props here on Power Stacks to Eugenio Suarez. He's got 10 home runs now in the season. and 6 singles and 4 doubles. Guys swinging for the fences still.
I don't think he gets enough credit for being one of the best Reds of the decade. Probably too small for an era, but kind of that era, post 2013 playoffs to, let's say, 2023 Reds, young Reds takeover. Like, as far as what, one of the best three Reds of that era. Votto, Castillo, but you can make the case if you just stack them up when you tack on Suarez's extra years too, that Suarez is right up there with Castillo. One more thing about him, 286 career homers. He'll get to 300 homers. That is we don't talk enough too just about the whole career that Eugenio Suarez has had, and everywhere he's gone, he's been loved.
Plays with joy, and the Reds will see him. What is it? Early June? Yeah, early June at Great American Ballpark. Eugenio Suarez rolls back into GABP. The Diamondbacks currently the same record the Reds have, a couple of games over 500. They have the unenviable task, though, of playing in the National League West. So that's an uphill climb, but congrats to Gino for that accomplishment over the weekend. All right, your thoughts on seeing the Cardinals for the first time this season? The 4-game series, those are always – I mean, that's a good snapshot of my team versus your team when they play 4 games.
The Cardinals are the hardest team that I have in all of baseball of trying to figure out, like, as they like to say, what are you? They've kind of been stuck, seems too negative, but in a lot of ways stuck with a lot of these veterans who don't quite fit the timeline, who are later in their career. Your Contreras, your Grays, guys they've looked to trade. Their young core also isn't that young. Like, they've got good players and they're playing very well. Like Donovan and Nootbaar, Arenado is another guy. They tried to trade an old guy. They've got a lot of young, not young, but like old young guys, like TJ Friedel style of their career guys, and that's their quote unquote young core. Your Brendan Donovans, your Lars Nootbaars, Ivan Herrera, guys like that. Obviously, Donovan and Nootbaar are having very nice seasons, but there's still some uncertainty about who they are as players. They kind of have to take the torch and make this their team, even though they're already 27, 28. So they're kind of stuck unless those guys can break through. The rotation's old as well, and definitely is a weak spot. Their bullpen has actually been the story of their season for kind of how it's tanked their season. So definitely some opportunities for the Reds. That's this weekend, some pitching matchups in their favor. Kind of a big series. All right, let's see the Reds team kind of do it in the division, build some momentum after facing some terrible teams over the last week, and do it against a team that, while isn't great, is beatable and also kind of gives you some more credibility going up against.
I agree. 7-game series or 7-game homestand at Great American Ballpark before the Reds hit the road again, but it starts with 4 against St. Louis. Chaz, movie conversation maybe next time?
Sure, yeah.
But it could be painful, though.
I'm open to learning. I'm open.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe you just have to come over and sit in my basement and I'll force feed you, my top 5 all time, something like that.
So the Phineas and Ferb episode was like, it's a very smart show. Phineas and Ferb's and like, you're groaning, like, that's fine. Like, I know our listeners, just like the canary in the coal mine, will back me up as Phineas and Ferb being a very smart show. Can you, like, the audacity for a kid's cartoon to do a Shawshank Redemption homage? I said parody. Really what it is an homage. Like, that's pretty smart. That's pretty clever. And it was a good episode. So I get some of the references just because I've seen that episode, which was, when I was a kid. I haven't seen the movie.
I'm going to cut you off right there. Thanks for listening to Power Stack. Please tell a friend. Please like. Please subscribe. Chaz, see you at the ballpark, man. Take care.